All right, so talk about shape. Okay. All right, so shape are all going to be two-dimensional. Okay, so shapes obviously are flat shapes. And since all the art that we are creating in this class, and pretty much any sort of visual art you guys will be creating, unless you go into sculpture or ceramics or something down in that road, is flat. So working on our sketchbook, we're working on a two-dimensional surface. Working on the computer screen, we're working on a two-dimensional surface. So that's why two-dimensional shapes will really really be important when we're designing our compositions. We're going to want to design specific types of shapes. We're going to want to design very descriptive shapes, very interesting shapes, and doing those in a way that create compelling compositions for our projects. But it's all because those should take such a priority because they're flat, and it's the opposite, and we're working in a flat medium. So the opposite of that shape, of a flat two-dimensional shape, is form. A form is three-dimensional. Okay. So even if you're trying to draw something that is three-dimensional and has volume and has a three-dimensional form to it, you still want to make sure when you're drawing it on a two-dimensional surface like your paper or the computer screen that it's being represented as a good shape. So let's just look at some forms first and then kind of see their shape. So have you guys doodled the 3D cube before? So this is a three-dimensional form. It's something that's trying to be 3D. It's trying to look like it has volume. It has some shadows on it. And basically, this is an illusion of three-dimensional form. That's not a real physical three-dimensional cube there. It is an illusion of a three-dimensional cube drawn on a flat surface, okay? So the shape of this is this right here. So even if something does have a three-dimensional form to it, you still want to try and train your eye or train your mind to see that flat two-dimensional shape. So this is really a good way to simplify things you're looking at, simplify artwork, simplify your working process rather than trying to get that 3D form. You may eventually get there, but first you want to make sure you have a good shape, okay? So even if you have a simple sphere, a ball, some sort like that, with shading on it, anything like that, you still want to see just that simple flat shape. Another good word to think about for shape is silhouette. So thinking about the silhouette and shape basically mean the same thing. You can do this for other ones as well. You go to like a pyramid type form. And then there is the silhouette shape. All right. So that's going to be the main difference there. And we always want to prioritize those shapes. So when you guys are developing your artwork for this class later on, I'm going to ask you, and if you get feedback on your work, I'm going to be saying, is that a good shape? Are your shapes working? If everything is a silhouette, can I still tell what your image is? Okay. So our basic shapes that we have to work with are circle, square, and triangle. Okay, so those are the most basic, very simple shapes. That kind of goes hand to hand too with the most basic shapes that you can create on Illustrator. So if you guys, as you've been working on this first project, have you gone and used the ellipse tool, the rectangle tool, and the polygon tool in Illustrator?
Yeah, I have.
Okay, good. So yeah, those are the most basic shapes for our drawing, but also the most basic shapes when you're working in Illustrator. And then eventually, in both drawing and in Illustrator, we will get to create more unique shapes. So anything that's a flat, unique shape, and we can get these that are more unusual, more complex, but it's still a good, flat, two-dimensional shape there. Okay. So in my own artwork, I always am trying to think about a good shape. So what is going to make a good shape? A good shape is basically just a descriptive shape. It's basically just a shape that even if it is filled in as a black silhouette, you can still tell what it is. So I do a lot of sketching. Well, I did it more before the virus hit, where I would go outside, go to a new neighborhood around where I live and draw buildings and people and things like that. But especially when I would be drawing buildings, I would always try and choose a subject matter based on if it is a good shape, okay? And even though we live in a three-dimensional world and we see things in three-dimensional forms, we want to try and switch our mind, actually, I'm gonna change this here, to see the shape of something, okay? So this may be the form here. So this has also a lot of details on it. So we got architectural details. There's light and shadow details here. It's attempting to make it look three-dimensional. Little texture of parts of the architecture. And none of these things like the shading, the details help the silhouette shape, okay? So, but when I see something like this in the real world, and even when I start to draw it, I want to draw it in a way where I'm just looking at that silhouette. Okay, so trying to eliminate any of the shadows showing the three-dimensional form, eliminate any of those details. And if you can fill in your shape, if you can fill in whatever shape you're creating, you can fill it in solid black and still tell what it is. That's a good, going to be a good sign that it is a shape that's working in your composition. It's a descriptive shape and things like that. Okay, again, shape, two-dimensional, form, three-dimensional. And you can always create, and usually you should create that shape first. Then you can always come back in and add details, shading, other things later on. But it's much easier to make sure that your composition is working when you're drawing stuff or creating and planning it out just through the use of those shapes. Okay. Does that make sense? Any questions on that difference between what a shape is, what form is, what to look for in your drawings when doing that? Okay. All right. So what we're going to do next is you can create entire compositions just using those silhouettes. So let's go here. Actually, let's see. So you can come here and create an entire piece of artwork just with silhouettes, and it can be a very nice and effective thing to do as you're working. And if you do it well enough and you design good shapes, then you may not even need to make something look three-dimensional. You may not need extra details on these shapes that you're creating. Just having good silhouettes can oftentimes be more effective than lots of details and lots of shading. So if I come in here, I'm making all this a silhouette here in the foreground. Fill this in. So even if I'm eliminating any sort of details, any sort of shading, this should still be an effective composition here. So I got some dark silhouette shapes there in the foreground. I can add some light silhouette shapes there in the background. Notice I'm making these shapes using line, which is it's okay. So usually your artwork, even though we're kind of separating it into 2 days, 1 day of shape, 1 day of line, you'll end up having shape and line in your drawings. All right. So there is a drawing, a very, very simple drawing, but still an effective one using just silhouettes. And you can communicate almost more effectively oftentimes with very simple silhouettes. When you have a good, simple silhouette, people can tell what they're looking at very instantly, very quickly. It gives them, it doesn't overwhelm them with details as they're looking at your work. And really our main goal is to visually be able to communicate visually. So lots of times these silhouettes will help us to communicate visually. Okay, so remember, is it a good shape? So basically that good shape is, can you tell what it is when it's filled in? So I'm going to draw a little house here. All right, so there's my house. What do you guys think?
Looks good.
It looks good. You like it?
Simple but effective.
Okay, but what if I was to fill this in with solid black? Would you still be able to tell what it is? So let's do that. So if I was to fill this in, can you tell what this is just by looking at this one?
I don't know. It still looks like a house to me.
Doesn't look like a box.
Yeah, it does kind of look like a box.
So if someone if this was turned in on an assignment or anything, something like that, I would say, can you design this silhouette shape to communicate that it's a house more effectively? So we can make a few subtle changes to this to make it a better shape. So all I'm going to do is turn it at a little bit more of an angle. So I see a little bit more of that slanted roof. Make the bottom kind of pinch in a little bit more so we can see the difference. But the biggest thing is what I want to do is move this chimney up here. I can still add my details, my shading on there. But now when I take this one and fill in this one solid black, this should have a silhouette shape that can communicate better to the viewer. So now hopefully this one here is being a little bit more effective. I mean, I could add more. I could add like little gutter things there. Maybe I could add a little bush right here. Just other things to even further push that silhouette and make it really clear to the viewer.
Looks like a cupcake with a candle on it to me.
Well, it might be. Similar idea. So yeah, same idea. But the point is, it's a more interesting shape than that kind of that little box, that little blocky box there. Now I'm just getting hungry looking at this cupcake.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so that's a good way to test any drawing that you guys make in this class or ever really, is just kind of make a version of it where it's filled in solid black. Can I still tell what it is? Is it still communicating my idea? And things like that, okay? So we'll get in there, and that's gonna kind of be a common theme for basically every project we work on for a lot of the classes. How are you designing your shapes in a way where they're communicating effectively, they're communicating what you want them to communicate, and you're just kind of creating unique, interesting shapes. I mean, you can build a composition with just those very, very basic shapes, but generally it will be a good idea to kind of make them more unique, make them more visually interesting, make them more unusual possibly by combining them, changing them around. So these ones here will be very easy to make in Illustrator. Once you practice with the pen tool, these are the type of shapes you can be making with the pen tool later on. The more practice you have with that, where you have straights, curves, complicated, lots of edges on them, lots of corners as you're working. Oh, and also usually I want to kind of try and design the shape first and really think about that. And then you can add in all those little details. Okay, so I can add all these details of texture, bricks, different things on here on this house. But it's easier to do that, and I will know all those things are going to work better if I first know it's a good silhouette. Because now I can just start adding stuff on here and I know it's a good silhouette already. If I know it's that good silhouette, then I don't have much more work to do. It's just kind of just adding icing on the cake there. All right, let's look at some artists that use shape in their work here. Okay, where's my Ivan Earl? All right. So this is one of my favorite examples of some shape-based artwork. So has anyone seen Sleeping Beauty before? Ever recently at all?
I mean, who hasn't? I feel like.
I rewatched it recently. I hadn't seen it since I was a kid, but really amazing animation in that film. Really good design overall. It has a very unique look to it, where it kind of looks different than a lot of the other Disney movies because of the stylized backgrounds and the amount of detail they were able to get in there. And one of the main concept artists for that movie was Ivan Earl. So a concept artist is an artist they hire before they start to do any animation, before they start the overall production of the movie, to create a bunch of artwork and kind of define the overall look of the film. So what are the characters going to look like? What will the background look like? What colors are we going to use? What shapes are we going to use in this? And Ivan Earl was the main concept artist, and they chose him because of the way that he uses shapes in his artwork. So here's an example of the scene where they're dancing in the forest, but I love the way that he rendered the people and the characters in here. So if you look at each one of those characters, they're made up of just a handful of different shapes. So you don't get any details, no facial features, no folds in the clothing, no shading on there, not even trying to make the people look three-dimensional. But it's extremely effective in what it can communicate. You just glance at the image and you can instantly tell what's going on, what the characters are doing. You get a sense of movement from those types of shapes. And it's just very simply drawn in a very unique way. And even when you start to see how he designed the background is very simple shapes, and he exaggerates the shapes of those trees. So he makes the trees very rectangular, very square. And once he has a good, unique silhouette for those trees, he just kind of puts some of those details and textures on there. And look at all these little plants down here in the foreground. These are basically flat little, just kind of stamps that he did as he was working on that. But all just two-dimensional and all flat there.
I think it's interesting because if you look at it from, like you said, with just the shapes of the characters, you don't necessarily get just a sense of movement from one or the other. It's the way those two characters are drawn together and the shapes that they have that kind of interact with one another. So it's not just, looking at one person saying, oh, she's dancing. It's looking at both of them and saying, oh, they're dancing.
Yeah, he's thinking of how their entire shapes will relate to each other. So kind of like the diagonal of the guy's body, the diagonal of his leg, and then kind of the swooping shape of the hair and of the dress.
Yeah. So it's not just one thing is doing all the work, but it's both of them together that are making the scene kind of what it is.
Yeah, and they really fit together nicely. Like you can almost see them moving, the two of those characters, those group of shapes.
Yeah,
kind
you
of
can almost imagine it in your head or something. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So you would just say, in analyzing this work, you say he designed some really good shapes to show a good sense of movement with those characters. So, and very simply done. So if he started to draw in details, like individual strands of hair, folds in the clothing, things like that, it might take away from the sense of movement too, because oftentimes simpler is a more effective communicator for a lot of these things. I'll show you a few more examples of his artwork. Here's another one he did for Sleeping Beauty. So again, very simple everywhere, but I like what he's doing with these trees. So he's basically simplifying this group of trees down to just a couple rectangular shapes, these trees to circles. And then for the castle, he's making these very long, very tall and skinny rectangles and tall and skinny triangles to give it a very elegant feel. But overall in this art, there's not a lot of like three-dimensional shading. There's a little bit here on the castle, but that's about it. Everything else is very flat. He does add in a bunch of little details and texture on here, but that's not taking away really from the overall silhouette shape of the tree.
I like how he made those trees just little circles on the top. That way you can kind of just, you know, put more detail into the landscape rather than having a bunch of trees block everything.
Yeah, and a lot of trees are hard to draw because they're so busy and there's all those leaves and little shapes in there. And when you can simplify it down to just a simple circle, it oftentimes will work a lot better. Yeah, nice simple rolling hills here in the far off distance. So again, this one was done for Sleeping Beauty. Here's another one of the fight scene with the dragon. So different types of shapes here. So these are more kind of angular shapes, a little bit more exciting. You get some strong diagonals, lots of points. So eventually we'll talk about how to design shapes for different moves to make something feel like action, something feel more scary. But this is kind of an example of action and kind of scary mood using those shapes. And not a lot of details in here. So really effective without, I mean, you have a little bit of details on the dragon, kind of this very simple pattern, and some details here in the thorn bushes, but that's about it. And so this was based, they hired him for that because this is what his personal work looked like. So this is just a landscape painting he did. So you can see the people at Disney really liked his style, and they said, oh, we should have this guy work on Sleeping Beauty. So kind of same idea, flat shapes here for his personal work. Okay. So yeah, it's the artist Ty Carter. He works. He's a working concept artist now. I think he's worked at DreamWorks and on some different films. This is one of his personal pieces though, but I like the way he simplified those tree shapes. So a different version of simplifying tree shapes in this one. So you got, and then he's just making them smaller and smaller until you get these tiny little triangles all over this shape back here. The skier, the little focal point character, is a very simple little silhouette. And he's contrasting all these angular shapes of the trees with all these kind of rounded shapes of the hills there in the background. Here's another one of his, same idea, a lot of flat shapes. Same simplified kind of trees there. This one does have some light and shadow on it, like on the rocks down here. But overall, it's still the shapes doing the work. Yeah, this is artist Marissa Ware. She went to art school with me. And what's kind of interesting about her is she works in two very different styles, and one of hers is very detailed, and Line is doing a lot of the work where she uses these fine tip pens and draws tiny little details of line. But this is another style that she works in where it's much more about shape. She's published a children's book in this style. And I like this style of hers a little bit better because she's so effective at using the shapes in here. So the fox itself is a really good silhouette shape, but then all the little details and decorative elements around it are all just simple flat silhouettes. The plants, the little bit animals around here. Oh, and a good way to think about this is as if you are physically cutting out pieces of paper. Okay, so that's kind of how you should imagine when you're working in Adobe Illustrator, is as if you're cutting out a little piece of paper for each shape that you're creating. Okay, so that can be a good way to think about it. And I think one of these artists I have, where did that go? Yes, so here is an artist who does use actual cutout pieces of paper to create her artwork. So you can see she paints these pieces of paper different colors, gets some brushwork texture on it, but then she's cutting out that brown shape for the bear, green shapes for the grass. And that's kind of a really nice way. Here's another one of hers. So you can see the little X-Acto knife she's working with there. But if you can kind of switch your mindset to you're not drawing something, especially in Adobe Illustrator, but you're designing a variety of shapes to create a composition, okay? To fit in that two-dimensional composition. Okay. So now we will watch a short little video clip here. All right. Has anyone seen Batman the Animated Series before?
Yes.
What do you, have you seen all the old ones from the 90s, Connor?
I wouldn't say all of them.
Some of them?
I definitely watched a lot when it was on TV when I was a kid.
Nice. So just a little background on this show. It came out in like 91, 92. And like during the 80s, a lot of the cartoons looked kind of the same. They were overly detailed. Think of like the G.I. Joe cartoons from the 80s, where they were drawing individual wrinkles on people's faces and folds in clothing. And then the artist Bruce Timm, he was influenced by Japanese animation, and he kind of really simplified the design of the characters down to just very simple silhouette shapes. And that allowed to create, one, a very unique look for the show. So it had a very distinct, new, unique look to it, but it also allowed the animators to kind of create better animation, because they were only they weren't simplifying as complicated, they weren't animating complicated shapes. They were animating more simplified characters, so they could focus more on weight and motion and create a really unique look to it, and unique animation. So here's just the intro from the show. It's just a minute long, but just kind of take note as you watch this and see all the different places where they use good silhouette shapes in this very short little intro here. Oops, sorry, just a sec.
Nostalgia.
All right, so yeah, throughout that very short animation, you can see how they're using silhouette throughout here. So it's really done for a number of reasons. So it creates a really cool mood to it. It kind of makes everything have that kind of dark noir feel to it. But it's also a very effective communicator. So when you can look at something like this, even though there's a lot going on, characters running, a cop car chasing them, you can very instantly tell what's going on. And even the buildings in the background are simple silhouettes. The characters and the focal points are just silhouettes, and there's just a little bit of details here and there throughout the animation. But for the most part, they're telling a good chunk of this just in silhouette shapes, and it works well for, you know, the character. So good, clear, with no details, we can tell this is two guys drawing their guns. I'll show you my favorite shot here. That's my favorite shot in it right there. It's all silhouette, but very clear focal point, clear action here. Big silhouette moon. And then this last one here kind of illustrates the point. So here it is with details where you can see details of Batman's costume, things like that. But really, you can tell and you get just as good a sense from it from just the silhouette there. All right, let me find some images here really quick. Just one sec, sorry. There we go. No, that's not it. All right. All right. I can't find some pictures I want us to draw from. I can't find them here. Then we'll just do some of it next class. Yeah, this is not right here. Okay. Any questions on any of this or the project that's coming up due next week?
I do not have any questions personally.
Okay. So yeah, that's pretty much it for today then. So make sure you guys are going through and working on the project, going through all those YouTube videos. Let me give you that link just in case anyone needs it. So there's the link there. Yeah, like I said, you will need to get through episode 9 for the first project, okay? So yeah, if you guys have questions on that or want me to look it over, send it to me tomorrow or before class. And if we can look over it together like as a class, if you send it to me before the class or just anytime before the due date on Friday, and I can give you guys feedback on that and make sure it's looking okay. And I would say for every project, just kind of use that as a resource where the people always do better on the projects if you get some feedback before the due date. So it just might be a few little things, you know, add a few more varieties of those strokes on there, or show me that you can use the pen tool in a certain way. Just little things that can help bump up your grade. Everyone gets a better grade if they kind of check in at least once before they turn in that project. Okay, it's not as important on this first project since it's pretty simple, but definitely for the last 3 projects.
And you want us to send that to you through your email or Canvas? I forget.
Either or, but probably Canvas would be better. I just see those. I get more notifications from my
Can you
Canvas.
send PDF files through Canvas?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
Okay, well,
Yep.
I'll figure it out one way or another.
Yeah. If for some reason the PDF file is too big, just check on the videos where I show you how to do those compression settings, which just are the settings when you save it as a PDF. There's those compression settings just make it a smaller file, so it is easier to send through email and stuff.
All right, sounds good.
Yep. So yeah, that's it for today. Let me know if anyone has questions before they log off. I'll leave this open for a sec, but that'll be it.
All right, you have a nice rest of your day.